G'day footy fans, it is round 3 already. Today I'm going to take you through my tipping predictions. Hopefully I can give you a little bit of insight. And if you're not yet subscribed, please hit that sub button down below. Let's get into it. Thursday night, we have a blockbuster game. We've got the Western Bulldogs versus the Sydney Swans. Traditionally, the Bulldogs match up well against the Swans, and I expect this to be no different. The battle will be won and lost in the midfield. Watching the first two Bulldogs games this year, the midfield didn't match up well to Melbourne or to Carlton, and it didn't look like Bevo made any changes to the midfield last week, but I'll be damned if he doesn't make changes this week to ensure that Sydney's midfield doesn't get on top of the Western Bulldogs. I expect Mills and Warner from the Swans to go to Bontempelli and McRae because that matchup is going to be pretty important. Shutting down those players will ensure that the Swans can win the ball out of the centre. The Swans have found some goals from their midfields in the first two matches. You had Heaney last week who got 5 and Parker 5 in round 1. The team that's most efficient going into the forward 50 is the team that wins. The Dogs will be too good down at Marvel Stadium. I've got the Dogs by 12. Melbourne versus Essendon. Essendon played well against the Lions last week. Unfortunately, they didn't put on that scoreboard pressure and weren't efficient kicking for goal. This meant that they were more behind at the half and then couldn't quite get that lead back against the Lions. Overall, I think Essendon played well last week, which shows their form is good coming into this game. I think this game's going to be closer than expected. Melbourne had a pretty tough midfield duel last week against the Gold Coast players, and Gold Coast looked like they might even win that game. There might be a chance that Melbourne's midfield is fatigued after last week, although when you look at Petrarca and Oliver, who had 41 and 34 disposals respectively, I think they'll still have a pretty significant influence on this match. Personally, I'd like to see Essendon try Merritt or Parrish go to these players to ensure that Melbourne doesn't get those efficient clearances that carved up Gold Coast last week. Luke Jackson was massive last week for Melbourne. He was involved in a lot of scores and was important with his second and third efforts in the clearance. I think Sammy Draper's going to be important to ensure that he can go with him and be accountable in the forward, as well as making sure that he doesn't get those clearances out of the centre. My tip is Melbourne by 18. Adelaide versus Port Adelaide. I think Adelaide have Laird coming back this week, but their first 2 weeks weren't particularly convincing. Port Adelaide didn't have such a good game last week in terms of efficiency, but they dominated most of their stats. I can't see them losing this game. It should be a pretty interesting game, as showdowns normally are. I've got Port by 22 points. GWS versus the Gold Coast. I'm keen for this game. I'm loving the way that Gold Coast are playing at the moment. Their midfields are tough and winning a lot of the ball, and they're only getting better as they spend more time working together and understanding where they should be to be more predictable for each other. Unfortunately for Gold Coast last week, they weren't as efficient as what they needed to be to knock off what is probably the best team in the comp, Melbourne. And GWS, they got smashed by the Tigers last week. However, the Tigers are an unpredictable team and they're hard to match up on. And if the coaches don't have the right strategy against them, then blowouts can happen. I predict the GWS Giants will match up better with the Gold Coast Suns, as the Suns, from what I see, play more conventional football, winning it out of the centre to deliver the ball first for their forwards, whereas the Tigers, from what I see, is they play off opponents' mistakes and hurt them on the counter. Phil Davis is also out, which is a big out for the Giants. I'm tipping the Suns by 13 points. Collingwood versus Geelong. Collingwood at the MCG, they normally play good football there. They've got a young, exciting list, and the Dacos brothers look exceptional, as well as Lipinski. Collingwood were good last week, but I'm just not quite a believer yet. I don't have a good explanation for that, just that it's 2 rounds into the season and my gut is saying, no, I'm not going to tip Collingwood against a known Geelong side who can play good football. Mills and Warner for the Swans did an awesome job on Dangerfield shutting down his influence last week. I think Dangerfield's going to have a big game this week, and I'm just not quite sure who goes to him from the Collingwood side. My tip is Geelong to win by 20. Brisbane versus North Melbourne. North got the win last week, but it was pretty ugly football against an undermanned West Coast side. They weren't convincing, and Taron Thomas got injured, and I think Luke Davies-Uniacke might be out, or he might have a concussion test. The Lions have looked okay. I don't think they're playing their best football yet, but they're starting to gel and they're starting to mesh. Lachie Neale was sensational last week out of the centre, as well as going forward to kick goals. I've got the Lions pretty comfortably here by 30 points. Carlton versus Hawthorne. Carlton have been bloody good, haven't they? If you've got midfields giving good service to forwards like Curnow and Mackay, then you're normally going to be pretty competitive. And then you've got players like Cripps or Kennedy who can go forward and kick goals. But you also never know what a 9-day break can do to a team. And Carlton played last Thursday, and they're not playing until Saturday this week. Hawthorne, they're a bit of an unknown this year. Sammy Mitchell seems to be doing a good things coaching. I mean, if you look at the stats against Port Adelaide, they got completely smashed. They got smashed in clearances, smashed in contested possessions, smashed in possessions, smashed in inside 50s, but they won inside 50 marks, and they were also significantly more efficient going forward. So Sammy Mitchell's obviously doing some pretty interesting thing coaching that I can't quite understand yet. I think I'm going to watch them closely to figure it out. I think this is going to be an interesting game, but I think that Carlton's ability to win the ball out of the midfield, as well as giving their ball to the forwards efficiently, will make them win the game. I've got Carlton by 22 points. St Kilda versus Richmond. Well, the Tigers were good last week. They seem to be back to their typical fast-paced, buzzing, flying V, attack play style, and it worked for them. They caught GWS off guard many times. Noah Bolter was huge for the Tigers. He kicked 4 goals and just seemed to be everywhere, marking the ball or setting up players to go forward. This is a tough one. The Saints played a good second half of the game last week, but the first half of the Saints and the Dockers may be one of the worst halves of football I've ever seen in my life. If you don't believe me, have a look at this.
He's back there, McKenzie waiting out Collier, had it in the fingertips. Just couldn't get a kick away. It's cleared away, but it'll come back in, but Young dropping the mark. There goes with a handle over the head. Just trying to do the fancy things, but they've got footy. As Brody, he scrums it, poor delivery. Walters went one-handed, still the gutter. Michael Walters, but not the finish.
But in St Kilda's second half, when they got the ball, instead of overusing that handball, they seemed to make the right play, 1 or 2 handballs, and then a kick quickly to their forwards. And when you've got Max King, you want to get the ball in there quickly before they can double or triple team him, as that almost always happens. Prestia and Rewalt might be coming back for the Tigers, which maybe tips the scale in their favour. I'm tipping the Tigers by 10, but I may well change this closer to the game. West Coast versus Fremantle. This might be the least hyped derby in a long time. West Coast team is missing quite a few players, as most people are aware of. Fremantle, they didn't play well last week, but I expect them to have a good season still. Only one team here has anything to lose, and that's the Dockers. You never know what's going to happen in the derbies, but I've got the Dockers by 25 points, pretty comfortably. That's my tipping for round 3. As always, thanks for watching. Hit that sub button below, comment your tips. Peace out.